So this screencast is going to address the transition from World War II to the Cold War, and it will address some of the projects that we will have to complete throughout this particular unit. So we're going to first start off with the fascist simulation debriefing. You should have completed a Google form, and just to think about some of the soft skills that emerge as a result of trying to coordinate, various students with various agendas, skills, and so on. So you want to think about some of those soft skills and how the World War II simulation maybe helped you better understand, helped you kind of figure out some of your strengths and weaknesses. Thinking about the questions here, not all about soft skills, but also about society and what the Nazis were trying to accomplish. So here's some of the data. Keep in mind, this is from a prior year, so data from your year probably be addressed in class. So here you see some of the specifics to this particular class here. Is it easy to organize people, split across the middle almost? Would it be in the best interest to remove certain segments of the class? You see yes at about 87%. So if you're talking about removing people from class, then that seems to be moving up the pyramid of hate and some of that genocidal intent right there. Do you think people care more about their own success or overall success of the class and peers? People primarily cared about class. Think about that simulation and what you did, and how the simulation helped you better understand society, fascism, as well as World War II. Here you see some of the responses to this question. How did the simulation help you better understand fascism? Some students may have tried to sabotage other classes, and so on. So ridiculous things and humiliating themselves for a grade. So you think about some of the tasks that were assigned to earn extra points. If you found yourself looking to complete those tasks for the improvement of the overall class grade, then you represent somebody trying to do your best for the good of the class. So as we transition into the Cold War, we want to think about how else can a society be organized. So for the Cold War, we're pretty much going to be looking at these four isms down here: fascism, socialism, communism, and capitalism. Notice how I've crossed out fascism because World War II ends that particular ism. And now we're going to look at socialism and communism. So the Cold War, for the most part, is a fight between the capitalists fighting it out with the communists. So we also see socialism here. And we'll be moving on to this next particular chart that created to try to give you an understanding of the difference between these isms here. So as I look at these items, for fascism, you have to have a high nationalism, but you also have elements of capitalism in fascism. As far as, let's see, socialism, in this case, it could be optional and could also be optional in capitalism. And we're referring to nationalism. So this section right here is about nationalism. Looking to the past for answers. So fascists seem to be the only group that really is doing that. You might have components of that here, here, and here, but for the most part, what separates fascism from these other isms is that attempt to try to resurrect the past. This section right here is looking at markets can determine what to produce, but you would know as a nationalistic citizen. So here they're looking at, once again, the component of nationalism. In a communist state, the dictatorship determines what to produce. So in this case, you have a resource like metal, and then the dictatorship or the government determines how many tanks they would need to produce utilizing the resource or this factor of production of metal. In a capitalist society, the markets determine that. So the market pretty much means the invisible hand that is indirectly steering society to produce certain goods. So for example, let's use cell phones here. Is there a demand for flip phones? I do not think so, because people seem to want tablets and iPhones and things like that. So the market, just as a result of people not wanting this one and simply wanting this, pretty much means that the demand for this particular item is going to increase. And so that is an example of the invisible hand. So here goes some of the other items, the government, who owns the factors of production. What about voting? As we could see voting down here. Notice here the Politburo can determine who runs for elections. So let's say with the Soviet Union, the Politburo would determine who runs for elections. So maybe they pick this individual here, this individual here. But at the end of the day, the Politburo is the one that's determining. So yes, they do have elections and the people can vote for these candidates. But at the end of the day, the Politburo is the one making those decisions about who is going to run in those particular elections. Notice here we see capitalism and communism are two economic systems. Capitalism and communism could be the two. So here is just trying to look at these economic systems. They all are economic systems, but fascism seems to be a mixture of capitalism and communism dependent on nationalistic needs. Anyway, feel free to take a look at that chart so you can come to better understanding of those different isms. So here we see more of a definition. One of the things I'll focus on in class is going to be a classless society. So in communism, the goal here is to have a society of no classes. So if you have an upper, middle, lower, which would be part of capitalism where you need a system of classes, the goal behind communism is to erase all of those particular classes. So here you can see some of the other items. So as far as test review, guys, just try to focus on what will be focused on there then when we get to assessments. All right, so here, did we just compare an economic and political system? What helps their nation? All right, so we're just going to kind of move on because I've kind of addressed that item here. If you're in class, you know that in the 20s, we completed the Rich Dad, Poor Dad reading, and I had you look at some excerpts from the Communist Manifesto. So that's something that we're going to be doing once again, trying to revisit some of those ideas. Karl Marx arguing workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. So there will be another screencast that will address some of the communist ideology. Just trying to get you to refer back to, think back to what we did in the 20s where we addressed some of these items because we're definitely coming back to them. What is the main problem Americans and America will have with communism? So that's just a question that we might address in class. But the end result here, some people might be tired of making three and spending three. So this is, again, trying to get you to think back to the 20 simulation. In order for communism to take place, you have to get rid of those classes. And as I said before, communism is about a class of society, whereas capitalism depends on having those classes for whatever reasons. So these are some responses from the Roaring Twenties, Rich Dad, Poor Dad assignment, where students were asked these questions. Do you agree with the ideas in the manifesto? We see, more yeses than no. Does money indirectly control people? Here we see 92. So this is all going back to the Rich Dad, Poor Dad, responses here. So I was kind of setting you up back in the 20s because I knew we were going to come back to this particular issue on some level. So for now, we're going to be looking at some of the specific assignments. Because for the Cold War section, there are a couple of projects and presentations that you are going to be responsible for. So for the first item, communist simulation, we are going to have new seats and new groups that are going to be determined, and the room is going to be divided, and there's going to be a dividing line. And we are going to have a communist grading. Please do not get upset about the grades here because this is all going to be temporary and you will have a chance to redeem yourself. So for the communist simulation of grading, the class will be divided into two sections. The communists will be on one side, and I usually have 10, and then we will have the remaining students over here in their desks. Now, the directions are pretty much going to be this. The communists can use all of their collective factors of production or their resources, meaning their ability to participate, their ability to know the material, understanding of history, ability to read, all of that stuff. They are going to work together to answer a series of questions. However, since there's 10, they will only get an average. So whatever their average is going to be their particular grade. Whereas on the individual side, whatever you get, you get. So let's just say you have 4 questions that you were asked to complete and you only wind up getting 1 right. You wind up getting, for the most part, all wrong with the exception of 1. Then your grade is going to be a 25. Whereas over here, it's going to be based on the group's average. The communists are allowed to work together and the capitalists have to work as individuals. And what's going to happen is you are going to, after a couple of classes, I'm going to come up with a grading economic system. So it might be those students with a 0 to 20, they will be considered part of the lower class, and we'll have the middle class and the upper, It'll just kind of determine how much money you have, and then you will have to obtain these cards that are based on, whatever you are able to afford. So that'll be addressed in another screencast. All I'm letting you know is for the Cold War unit, this is one simulation that's going on. I'm just trying to address right here. We're going to have communist grading. We're going to have to address some of the win-loss. Each side will be given a leader, and the leader is going to have to make decisions to determine how they're going to, have their capitalist or communist side prevail over the other. And that will be addressed again at a later screencast. I'll try to come up with one for each particular item. So we notice here, we see the communist grading is this one. This is where your questions and answers are going to come from, where you're just going to either be in this communist side or the capitalist side. And then we'll have a win-loss sheet where students are going to be, primarily the leaders, are going to have to respond to a series of scenarios. We're also going to have a 50s, 60s section presentation. So for the 50s, 60s presentation, for the Cold War, you are going to have your unit presentation. Your unit presentation is similar to the ones that we've done in prior units, where each student gets one of 30 topics. But then we are at the end of the Cold War going to have a 50s and 60s group presentation that will be determined, and groups will be assigned at a later date. For the most part, all of the items are already provided for students on the site. So here you see, all of the topics, and it's pretty simple. This is going to be one topic. This is another topic. And then it kind of goes off like that. So I don't know what this one is. This one might be 68. This one might be cars. So you're going to see some of the special requirements, and then you have a rubric. The second one, this could be atomic energy. So you're going to have your special directions and then your rubric. So what you're looking at here is pretty much, about, I don't even remember how many topics I have here. We have 21, so we have 11. There are 11 unit topics or group projects, and then each student is going to be asked to play a role within the group. So there'll be a later screencast about that. This is giving you an example. You see the directions, you see the rubric. The Cold War game will begin with this. There'll be a screencast on this particular item, and that's it for some of the transition to the Cold War from World War II.